Okay, we're getting started today with our lecture on defense in depth. Right? Defense in depth, or layers upon layers on layers, and how do we actually set up our defenses? Okay, if you remember the NIST framework, we identified and we've been, identifying our assets, identifying our vulnerabilities. Now we're in this protect phase where we have to actually set up our defenses in an appropriate way, set up our architecture in a defensive posture, and make sure all of our hosts and endpoints are secure as well. Right. So there's not just one single point where things can fail and everything goes wrong. We're going to have multiple fail safes. And so now the whole point of today is to give you the language of how to talk about these multiple fail safes and where it's appropriate to put them and what are the implications of where you put things. Okay, so we're going to talk about security defense layers and the Swiss cheese model. We're going to talk about controls, and I give you some mnemonics on how you can memorize all the different controls very easily. We'll talk about failures and when things go wrong and what it looks like to assess these things that have gone wrong. So you've seen this image inside your textbook, right? It is this gobstopper, this onion, this idea that we're going to secure ourselves with many layers. There's not just going to be one thing that goes wrong and the bad guys are in. So at the innermost layer, we have data security. Anyone give me an example of what is data security? What is one layer of defense for protecting data?
Encryption.
Hell yeah, right? Encrypt that data. Literally the ones and zeros, let's encrypt it so that no one can read them. Cool. What about application security?
Logins, passwords.
Yep, so protecting accounts. What else?
Sanitizing inputs.
Sanitizing inputs, absolutely. What else? Talked about some yesterday.
Firewalls?
Yeah, we got web application firewalls, right? A whole bunch of different things we could put at the application level. Oops, how about endpoint security? What do we put at endpoints to protect them?
Firewalls as well.
Yeah, no tricks here, guys. You put those firewalls everywhere. I'm telling you, when we look at some of these images, you'll see that. Yeah, so firewalls. What else do we put at our endpoints on our hosts?
Antivirus, anti-malware.
Yep. How about network security things?
Firewalls?
More firewalls. What else?
IPS, IDS.
Good. Same idea with perimeter security. You can add some physical security too. Okay, cool. We have some ideas on where things go. That's good. Let's talk about these different kinds of controls. Again, we have data, just like you guys said. We have encryption and hashing. Right? That's how we're going to protect data. At the application level, again, we had firewalls. We forgot to mention, but there's also security patches, right? Make sure your Apache web server is up to date. On endpoints, what did we talk about? Firewalls. There's host intrusion detection systems, which is basically like an IDS for your host, right? You have TPM. Oh gosh, I forget what it stands for, but it's so that it's a piece of hardware that you can use to tell if your hardware has been hacked, essentially. Again, at endpoints, we have passwords, right? You need a password to actually log into your account on the machine. Multi-factor authentication. I need to put in a PIN number whenever I'm logging into my AWS account or when I'm logging into a bunch of full stack things, right? So you got multi-factor as well as logging, right? Every time I pretty much, my computer has a whole bunch of different logging services. Pretty much all your machines do a whole bunch of logging for you right there. Right at the network and at the perimeter, just like you guys said, IDS and IPS, they're going to live there as well. We're going to have firewalls and a couple of things we hadn't mentioned before, segmentation and border routers. We'll talk a little bit more about segmentation today as it's one of the core principles of establishing a secure security architecture, right? Just keep everything separated that needs to be separated, as well as having routers. Cool. I want to say anything here? about these things. No, I'll talk some more about some other things in a bit. All right, so let's talk about controls. And then when I use the word controls in this context, I'm talking about what are the actual defenses we can put up. And we can split them up into 3 categories of defenses. Okay. And the easiest way to memorize them, well, it's actually very easy to memorize them, right? Because they're on every single cybersecurity poster that's out there. In fact, let's prove it. Ooh, I don't want you to see. I don't want you to see that. Cybersecurity poster. There's 3 things we always see in cybersecurity posters. If we just Google it, there they are.
This
Ready?
is the human, physical, and I forgot the last one.
So we have this one on it. It doesn't have people on this one. I lied, maybe. It's not on all of them. Things are changing, I guess. But you get the locks, you get the 1s and 0s, and you get the people in the suits. Okay? Every single cybersecurity poster, that should be on there. Oh, here we go. You have a lock in here? You got the key. Close enough. All right? Pretty much every single cybersecurity poster you look up is going to have these 3 things. And I represent them as your 3 controls. Okay? Let's get back to it. No more joking. All right? So we have 3 controls. We have the administrative controls, and these are your people. The people are in the suits, right? Being able to control how these people work. So these are your policies, your procedures, your training, all of that sort of things, right? And we'll go through a bunch of examples for them. Additionally, we have the locks, the lock and key, the physical defenses, right? The actual walls, the doors, the windows, right? All of these things that you're thinking like, yeah, okay, that doesn't matter. But, think about this. This is absolutely serious. Think about if, you had, for example, a government's capital and, hundreds of, unknown people just walking around in there. Right? There is a huge breach of physical defenses where anyone could just walk in and plug in different kinds of devices onto the network. Rogue devices, steal devices, right? You have to, as the cybersecurity professional, be able to think about this because nothing matters if someone's able to just walk in and plug devices in, right? If someone's able to do that, we have bigger problems. And something we need to consider. So again, I'm talking doors, I'm talking walls, I'm talking windows, I'm talking the security cameras, I'm talking badge reader systems, man traps, all of those things are involved for physical security. And finally, we have the technical controls, and these are the 1s and 0s. And these are the ones that you are in charge generally of implementing, right? These are where you get your hands-on keyboard skills, your snort, your firewalls, right? Your IDS, IPS systems. All of that is that 1s and 0s domain, right? And this is how we'll memorize these controls. It makes it very easy to think of and to categorize these controls, okay? So that's one way that we can describe them and categorize them. The other way that we can describe them and categorize them, I want you to think of this as like a 2-dimensional plane here. So we have administrative, physical, and technical. The other dimension we have is when they act in defense, when they act in our defense. So the first one, we have preventative, right? These are going to prevent security incidents from happening. We have detective. These are going to alert us as they are happening. And then we have corrective. Something bad has already happened. This is going to be what we fix. Okay. Is anyone? Yeah, let's go through some examples of administrative controls. You guys should have, I want to say it's in the reading. I'm not super 100% confirmed that it is, but it should be in the reading. At least we could have this discussion here. What are some examples you guys have of administrative controls to help secure an organization?
Network limitations.
Tell me more, Tim.
In other words, if I'm on my company's network and I'm in charge of that network, I'm only going to allow employees to visit specific sites.
Okay, so, and how are you going to control that employees only visit specific sites? Is that some kind of technical control, or is it a policy instead?
Well, it would be both. I mean, the policy would be no personal websites, but that would be enforced through a technical fix by actively blocking those sites.
So we have two things. So we have an administrative control, which would be an acceptable use policy at work, right? Like, okay, you're not allowed to play RuneScape on your work computer. That would be, and we have our employees sign that as their acceptable use policy. Now, if you want a technical control that literally IP blocks, the jagex servers, that would be a technical control. So I just want to make sure that, yes, it's the same goal, stopping employees from going to sites they shouldn't be, but we have two different avenues kind of doing it. And sure, argue that an acceptable use policy is not as effective, but there's still two different controls. It's still now multiple layers of defense, I would argue. So sure. I like it. Acceptable use policy. Give me another administrative control example. Remember, talking about controlling people here.
So would education fall under that, or would that be a policy?
That would be a policy, and it would be an administrative control, right? That would be, cross-training your employees so that they know how to do multiple things. That would perhaps protect you. Imagine you have one employee that knows how to manage the databases, and now you have a situation, someone gets hit by a bus problem. This person gets hit by a bus, or they leave, and now you don't have anyone to manage this database. That's a security issue. So that's why you would train multiple employees. I would also say training employees to be aware of phishing campaigns. Training your employees, right, not to click on links or things like that. Training employees to when they think they are hacked, or when they think that there's some attempt, to reach out to the security team and not be afraid of them. Right? Those all things count as administrative controls for sure. What else?
Mandatory vacation and separation of duties.
Yeah, tell me more about those. Did anyone work at a place that had mandatory vacation? No.
I mean, I didn't personally have, but yes, I've worked at places that had it.
Right. So generally, there'll be places where people work in like finance or something like that. And can maybe you could speak, Wexler, about it? Why do we do this? Why do companies mandate vacation for certain roles?
Because if you're like operating like in the financial institution, if you're operating some kind of a legal operation that's ongoing, and you go away and suddenly a problem they're having stops, they know that you were basically the one doing it. I don't know if that's the best explanation.
It's essentially getting someone else to check your work for a couple of weeks, right? That's the whole idea here, because that's how we catch actually a lot of financial crimes. Is someone either goes on vacation, someone else checks their work, they see the books don't add up, and an investigation starts. Hanalei said one more, separation of duties. Can you tell us about separation of duties?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of similar to cross-training, but on the other side of the spectrum, but it's ensuring that there's not one choke point, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea here for separation of duties is you don't make it to only, like you said, not a single point of failure, not one person just making the decision. So for example, if you ever had to work in sales or something like that, or making any kind of big purchase orders where perhaps someone can write the check, but someone else has to approve or sign the check, or something like that, where it's like one thing happens, but two people need to actually approve, right? That would be a separation of duties, where it's like two things need to happen, but both people need to be able to do it. Someone signs check, someone approves check. In addition to that, there's a similar idea called dual control. Again, very similar. If you've ever seen like one of those Cold War movies where people go to activate, a nuclear missile, and two people have like these keys that they both have to put in at the same time to make it happen. Right? Similar. That's the idea of dual control, where two people need to do the exact same thing to make an action happen. Separation of duties, two people need to do different things to make something happen. Very similar. And absolutely, it's another control, right? It prevents one person from making a mistake. What else? What other administration controls should we be considering?
So separate from, would audits count, or would that be the same thing as like vacation leave?
What do you mean by audits?
So like you have a superior come in and audit what your job is, what you're responsible for doing.
I think that's a fine administrative control, especially if you say, maybe once a quarter that happens, once every year, once every, 2 quarters or something. I think that's a good administrative control. What else? There's a good couple examples that I haven't heard about yet.
Also just closing people out properly, like during termination, and also doing background checks.
There it is. Those are the two I'm waiting for here, right? When you're hiring someone, background checks, right? You want to make sure that this person is okay to work for you. I know if you're working for a lot of government jobs, you're going to make sure that you are not incredibly indebted, so that you not be easy to manipulate by potentially outside malicious forces. And same idea on the other end too. When you're terminated, make sure that we actually have some kind of process in place where you lose access to things, right? I'm aware of organizations where that is not completely the case, and you have disgruntled employees that can potentially break things after they're done. So I think we've gotten a good list here. I'll list everything I've got. So I got personnel security controls like acceptable use policies, right? I have separation of duties. I have dual control. Oh, here, succession planning, right? This is that making sure that if someone gets hit by a bus, it's not the end of the world sort of situation, or cross training. If you work for a great organization, they should always be talk of succession planning, right? There should never be fear that someone is going to leave and everything is going to fall apart, right? You should be working for an organization where it's okay if someone leaves, right? It won't be the end of the world. Cross-training employees, again, very tied to succession planning. Got background checks for people that you're hiring. This goes for if you're hiring contractors as well. Mandatory vacation time, so others can look at you. Similar to audits, I guess it would have the same thing there. Termination procedures, as well as any kind of legal controls that we have there. Cool. All right, so those are administrative controls examples. I'll make sure that at least we talk a bit about those. Okay. Let's talk about some of the layers of endpoint security. I think we already put a bunch of them out there, right? This is kind of where there's like some of the biggest attack surface, really, right? When we talk about endpoints, we talk about where people are actually putting their hands on keyboards and doing things. So their laptops, their cell phones, right? Tablets, all of those devices. And so when we're talking about endpoint security here, we've already listed out a whole bunch of them. So I'll put them here, right? We have passwords that need to be protected. We have encryption, right? We have file encryption for specific files, and you can completely encrypt the whole disk. Again, we talked about host firewalls, intrusion protection systems. What we haven't mentioned are DLP, or data loss prevention systems, right? So you can't take data out, or systems so that data can't be destroyed. We have white and blacklisting, or now being called allow blocklisting. Anti-malware devices, you guys have said, logging, multi-factor authentication, and blocking USB ports. Right? These are all answers for how would you harden a user's endpoint? How would you harden a laptop? Right? These are the things that you should be thinking of, because it's totally a valid interview question. You got a whole bunch of laptops you got to harden. What are the things you want to think about? You want to think about some kind of password security, disk encryption, host firewalls, right? All of these things should be included in your answer for how do you harden a user's endpoint. Okay, cool. So we're going to start talking about architecture now. And I'm going to tell you about the 4 common models that you'll see for the different kinds of architecture. Okay. So the first thing we have is uniform protection. This is the easiest to understand. Most of our home networks are very likely uniform protection networks, right? We have the internet, we have our router slash, our firewall slash router slash switch Wi-Fi device, right? That kind of manages everything else. And then we have our internal network, which has all of our personal devices on there. We generally don't have another VPN or subnet or something else happening in there, right? It's a pretty flat network, uniform protection. When would this be good? When is this okay? Or if you want to answer, when wouldn't this make sense as a solution?
It wouldn't really work if you have many different departments.
Why?
like they have like different like they have different data to protect.
Yes, right. You don't have to answer. I see you're coughing, but yeah, exactly. What if there's different data, different types of data that you need to protect? Well, it makes sense to kind of keep things separated then, right? So next model we have is protected enclaves. We'll have a specific area that we're going to make more defended. Right? Maybe we have a specific area that's going to be doing with billing, and we're going to keep all of that data, all of the stuff in there on a separate network, and we're going to keep it extra protected with another firewall and put up an IPS system so that we're aware of any alerts happening there because we're more concerned with that area. So we're going to protect it more, right? Any areas that we don't want people to touch because they're sensitive, we're going to protect them more. Not a crazy idea. We could do this based on risks or threat as well, right? Based on what's the worst thing that can happen, sort of ask ourselves that. And if the worst thing that can happen is not that bad, well, maybe we don't need to protect it that much. If the worst thing that can happen is absolutely critical, well, then that's where we're going to focus our efforts. Again, we're going to do role playing and think about what our threats are and what do they want to do and what is their availability and access and capability. That's how we decide what we're going to protect. And we have information classification based. All right, this is like you can imagine a government using, top secret or secret or whatever the next highest level is, right? We're saying different levels of security are going to determine how we protect or what level of protection we're going to offer for things. Okay, cool. So let's talk about segmentation, which again is I'm telling you is going to be the main architecture decision that we'll make to make our networks more secure. Okay, so let's take a look. We have segmentation. The idea here is you group your assets by their function, right? Anything that's going to be dealing with credit card information, let's keep that on a separate network, separate from all the other stuff where, the workers are going to be working and they might be browsing the internet for regular stuff, for whatever they do. Okay, so how can we segment things? Well, the first way we can do it is physically, literally get brand new switches and a router and, nothing is connected the same way, right? And if we're going to have it wireless network, it'll be two separate wireless networks so that they are physically separated, literally by physical world, there's separation in here. What is a problem potentially with using just physical separation? Tell me the pros and cons.
You don't have access, you don't have access for them to communicate with each other if they're physically separated.
Yeah, but we want that.
But you could also not want that.
Well, let's say we want that because this stuff, so we want to protect it, right? So it doesn't need to necessarily talk that. But think about you as a business now. What's the problem with having to buy twice as many physical devices?
It's expensive. It doesn't scale well.
Exactly. You got to change something. You need to physically go there. You're going to have to send someone to go around and plug things in or unplug them. So potentially it'll work, right? There are solutions, right? There are situations where you do need things physically separated. Maybe things need to be on-prem, right? But again, what are the costs of that? You literally have to buy separate physical devices, and you literally have to physically manage them now. But it is a potential solution. And does make things more secure. Again, cost benefits. All right. The alternative for physical segmentation then is what?
Logical segmentation.
Yeah, we have virtual segmentation. Right. Have VLANs. Separate your networks virtually. Now you don't need a whole bunch of switches and routers. You have virtual switches and routers. You want to manage those? You do that very easily without having to physically go somewhere. Right? This is the future. This is how we're doing things, basically. We'll do some kind of virtual segmentation and have different VLANs depending. We'll also have zones, right? We'll split our virtual areas up into zones. Ideas being like a DMZ, right? A lightly protected area where things can talk to the outside and it can talk to the inside, but we're not going to completely trust it, right? Somewhere in the middle. We'll create DMZs using like access control lists, again, essentially like firewalls, right? Essentially a list of rules based on ports and IP addresses and make some decisions. In addition to physical segmentation, I forgot to mention this too, they have air gaps, right? Literally physically segmenting things like that. Okay, so again, we use access control lists to set up DMZs. Air gaps are another way we can physically segment systems.
So air gaps aren't the same exact thing as physical segmentation?
No. So if I get two networks that'll connect to the same router, they can talk to each other, but I'll say they're physically separated because they're separate off of separate networks.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Air gap would mean completely separate. There have been cases, if you go do your own Googling, I've seen MIT things where they've been able to move things off of air gaps. Oh, even better, without even going crazy, without even crazy physics stuff. What's one way that you can cross an air gap?
Take a USB from one to the other.
Tim's thinking, right? People at least should be at least somewhat familiar now with the hack Stuxnet, right? Where United States and Israeli forces, cyber forces, were able to get malware onto Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities. These Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities were air gapped. There was no connection to the outside network. How were they able to get the malware in there? USB key drop. He dropped a whole bunch of USBs. I'm not sure in which parking lot somewhere. One of the people that worked there took the USB, ended up plugging it in. And that's how we were able to, that's how that attack was able to cross an air gap, right? And again, what does this relate to? This relates to administrative controls, right? You train your employees not to take those free USBs that are given out at conferences and stuff like that, right? Be more aware of those things. Okay.
Russia did the same thing to us and got a hold of our Department of Defense network. And to solve that problem, they just super glued the USB ports shut on computers.
Yep. They will, like, there you go. There's your physical solution, right? Like, don't let people plug these devices in anymore, right? Like, we have to be careful of other devices too, like smartwatches and things like that. You know, again, this is where you're going to have your physical controls, either literally super gluing the ports shut, or you're going to have administrative controls where people are not allowed to bring their smartphones or their smartwatches, or if they do bring them, they have to put them into some kind of like Faraday room or something like that, and can only access them outside of the building. I know, for example, one of the students, or I guess he's a graduate now, like cybersecurity professional now. They were doing work. They were going to an on-premise site. They were not allowed to bring their cell phones in, but they need to use their cell phone for managing some of the other things. So I think the way they would work it is he'd go in, he'd do work for an hour, and after an hour, he would have to come out and make a call just to say everything's all right or whatever, and then go back in. So like there's all kinds of things like that. Okay. Before I get to the Swiss cheese model, there's one thing I want to talk about. There's one question I have for you, which is, what is an internet-facing host? What do I mean when I say internet-facing host?
A server specifically designated to handle incoming and outgoing web requests.
Yes, the only thing I'll say is it doesn't have to be web, because when I think web, I think HTTP. But yes, you're right. Anything, any kind of machine that accepts inbound connections from the internet, right? Okay, just want to make sure we have that.
Does it have to be a server?
I mean, just have whatever you're thinking. What else would it be?
I don't know. He just said servers, and I was wondering if there could be something else.
Yeah, server's fine, right? Something that, you know, takes requests and make responses. Anything that's going to accept inbound connection to the internet. So I can't think of another example now of what else it would be. Okay. So again, we have this Swiss cheese model. I'm pretty sure this picture's in your book. If not, you can go ahead and check on Wikipedia, the /Swiss cheese model. But the idea here is no defense you have is completely perfect, right? And that is just a fact of how it has to be, right? If you want to use a safe, there has to be a door to put things in and take things out. Is that a vulnerability or is that a use? Right? Where we're kind of splitting hairs. But here's the idea, right? Every wall you put up has to have holes. Your goal is to set it up so that none of the holes line up, right? So that you have a complete defense. Because otherwise you have this picture here where all of the holes line up and someone's able to just completely pierce through every one of your defenses. Okay, so let's talk specifically about some failures. We have different types of failures. We have single failures and we have cascading failures. Right? Single points of failure is where one thing goes wrong and that breaks everything else. Okay. I'm trying to think of a specific example of that, but I don't have one right now. I have the one that's on my head is instead cascading failure. So let's talk about a cascading failure. The first example I have is the power outage in the Northeast. I want to say in 2004. Is that right? 2004. Yeah, fun times, right? Back in the before times, 2004, there was a power outage in the Northeast. I want to say it started somewhere in Canada. And the load kept growing, right? So the power went out there. So the load was pushed off to other plants. It grew too much. And each of these plants would constantly fail and they were not able to get back started up. Right? Here's your example of a cascading failure. We have human failures, right? Here's my personal favorite story is, well, I have two stories here. We have hospital nurses and passwords, which I'll link to you. It's a great story from Dartmouth's EDU publication on nurses putting sticky notes on their monitors so that they can get access, right? So that they had credentials so they can access to patient information. And here we have this friction between us trying to be like security professionals and what actually needs to happen. So I'll link that article there. It's pretty interesting, but you know, there are even some actual pictures of some of these machines that have the tons of sticky notes on them with all of the passwords, so people can get that, so that hospital staff could get the important information they need. And again, your job here is to enforce CIA, and CIA is not a single thing, right? It's a triad. So you're always going to be moving the points around, right? It's like one of those one of those star graphs almost, where you can move things around across the different dimensions. Doctors and patients need access to patient data, but how do we actually protect it now, right? It used to be doctors would just have clipboards. Now things are on iPads and on wireless networks, right? These things are easy to be hacked. So again, it's quite a bit of a mess there. The other good human failure story I have for you is, like I told you before, the Amazon US East 1 getting taken down. Where do I got that? Here it is. I'll link this blog post. It's actually really short, but there's one part that I always think is really funny. So again, the server outage took out US East, which was the largest AWS region, right? It was the largest mostly because it was the oldest one. It was US East 1. And what was it? An authorized S3 team member using an established playbook executed a command which was intended to remove a small number of servers for one of the S3 subsystems that is used for S3 billing. And unfortunately, one of the inputs in the command was entered incorrectly and a larger set of servers was removed than intended. Oops. Like, I just can't imagine what this guy was thinking after he did that and took down like half of the internet. Like, I just put in the wrong command. Sorry. But yeah, so we should have some kind of technical controls. You best believe that there are now, so that someone doesn't accidentally do that, right? I think of even technical controls on the Japanese Shinkansen bullet train, where in order to when they do their signaling, they have to do this thing where like they have the signal, they have to point at it and do things like 3 times before they actually hit a button, something like that. But I always enjoy these fun stories. Okay. Cool. So in summary, we talked about different types of controls and defenses, right? We talked about how we can classify them. We have the people, we have the physical, and we have the technical controls, right? All of our defenses have holes, that is purposeful, right? You know, your house has a door. So to counter that, to mitigate that, we have to layer the defenses up. You'll have multiple firewalls. You have IDS, you have encryption, you have passwords, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about secure architecture now. I'm gonna have a specific example, and we talked a little bit about failures and assessment. So let's do a specific example of making things a little bit more secure. I have my beautiful drawing right here. Oh gosh, here it is. It doesn't look as good anymore. There it is. There it is. Okay, so I drew this. This image right here, I kind of took it from was it Monday or Tuesday, where we showed some Nmap scans, and we had a little network, and we were like, oh, draw the network map of it. Here's something that we just kind of drew together now. Right, so I just put up here, we got 2 workstations. I got a web server, I got a mail server, I got an Active Directory server, and I got a DNS server. Here's my router with a firewall attached to it, and here's my internet. So what I want to do is turn this so that we have a DMZ. My question for you is, of these machines, of these servers, of all of these, who should go in the DMZ and why?
The web server, because it has more access to the internet.
Tell me more. I like what you're saying, but I want to hear more, something specific, actually.
The web server, because it is internet facing, so it accepts incoming traffic from outside of the network.
Yeah, let me be more specific here. I'll say that this is a public web server. Public. Right.
For the same reason, the mail server, assuming it's a public mail server, not like an internal one.
Even if it is internal, I would argue, right, I should be able to get mail from outside of the network. So yeah, I agree with you. Both of these devices should live in a DMZ. So let's kind of rearrange this now. I'm gonna do my best to rearrange this. We're gonna put them here, and we'll put that here, and we'll put the web server here, and we'll put the mail server here. And let's delete that and delete that. And how do we want to connect this now? Maybe what we can do is, since you said we want to separate them, let's make a VLAN. I'm going to wrap this up. I'll say here, DMZ VLAN. Okay, so we'll put that there. Maybe what we'll do is we'll move this internet up here. Oh, let's put it up here. Let's do it like this. Put the internet, come here, internet. We'll put the internet over here. Okay, we have the DMZ there. Let's get this arrow up. All right, internet to the DMZ. We should have maybe the router and firewall here. Oh. Maybe another, what's this? You go away. Maybe another firewall somewhere here in between the DMZ and the rest of our stuff. Another here. Router / firewall. And we can do some kind of connection here like this. Whoop, to that. And this kind of connects to everything else. Okay. So we got this image here where the internet will connect to this DMZ. Right, so this is a lightly protected area. And we don't trust these things as much because these things should be able to accept any kind of connection from outside there. Whereas these guys are not accepting any connections from outside the internet. Right. You've probably heard of a term as you were reading called a jump box. Right, jump box, you heard of it. You're like, what the heck's a jump box? Well, right, we have this stuff in here that we don't trust. This is like maybe trusted. But it's very likely that an attacker from the outside, right, they can't see everything in here. They can't see this, right? This is not public, but they can see the web server and they can see the mail server. So this is what they can attack. And if they get onto the web server and the mail server, maybe they can pivot now onto one of these workstations or other servers and get inside, right? This is how it happens. We get into the lightly protected zone, then pivot to somewhere else. right? Get through another firewall, get somewhere else. So in order to configure the things inside here, right, we'll oftentimes set up either usually virtually a specific device here that we give access to the firewall. Then we'll call our jump box. And so if you want to manage any of these devices, we have someone from inside connect to the jump box and then do their management. Usually this jump box will be a virtual machine, right? So we'll have this jump box, you connect to the jump box, you do your management of these two machines in here, and you could throw the jump box away if it's a virtual machine. Every time you want to use it, you make a new jump box. Okay, cool. Look at that. Look at us. Look at us securing our architecture. Quick questions on this?
Can you put this in Slack?
I could take a screenshot of it for sure. Let's do that. Oops.
Wouldn't you also want to segment the workstations from the other two servers as well? Wouldn't that be like, because they're workstations?
Maybe. So maybe, right? Like I don't know for this specific example, right? But potentially, right? If these are just your regular workstations, maybe I also have another area for dealing with credit card payments and stuff. Maybe I have another area for accounting, and I might want to segment those as well. So I agree. Potentially I might want to separate more things. And if that's the direction you're thinking appropriately, right? You should be thinking, okay, this is my new tool. I'm going to take everything that can be separated and separate it. Right? I'm going to separate things based on if they are more risky, right? Like these DMZ things are going to be a little bit lightly protected. Or separate things by, does it have more confidential information, right? So if we want to do that, right, maybe we can make another area, another VLAN for secret info, right? And then maybe we'll put in another firewall here.
Well, my thinking is that workstations are used directly by the average person, and the people are the weakest link in the security chain. So that's just
with it. So we'd have another VLAN here. You throw as many VLANs as you like. So I agree for sure.
I'm not sure I totally understand a jump box as far as, I mean, you're just creating another step in between you and accessing those things in the DMZ, right?
That is correct. Here's the thing about the jump box though. I'm going to only put what I need to manage these two things and nothing else. And it's going to be extra hardened.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. It's extra hardened.
Yeah, so let's add that. Here, and I'll even take another screenshot. Extra hardened only has stuff for managing DMZ. So that's the whole point of the jump box. So I'm not using me as my analyst computer that I might like do web browsing and other stuff on. I'm going to connect to this jump box that only has the tools necessary for whatever I need to do in here. Right? Maybe it has web scanner or like a Nessus or something like that. Whatever I need to update the stuff here or manage that. And then once I'm done with it, I can throw it away. If it's a virtual one. That's the idea. Here, let me take a new screenshot.
Yeah, but where is it actually running the jump?
In the DMZ. In the DMZ.
But where? On what actual physical machine? Is it gonna be on its own actual physical, or is it gonna be on one of the on either the web server or the mail server itself?
It's gonna be its own. It's gonna be separate.
Okay.
And it'll be either physical or virtual. But yes, it'll be its own separate. It'll have its own IP address inside here. And the firewall will have specific rules that let perhaps, so let's say this is your workstation. You're the analyst here. The firewall will have specific rules that allow you to talk to the jump box and allow the jump box to talk to you. Right? That's the whole point. It's like I'm going to connect to there and use that one to do all of the management instead of using my workstation. Right? Because if I'm going to use my workstation, that means the web server needs to be able to communicate with it. As opposed to having this thing in the middle, right? The jump box will function as something in the middle. Okay, that's the whole point of jump box. I don't want to spend too much time on jump box. It's not super big. Okay, so what are we working on today? And do a quick stop share and take out our workshop. Where did I put that? There we go. All right, so what are we going to work on? I'm going to give you some time to work on review questions. There's actually not that many this time. Let's see, I have it as chapter 10, but if we look at the mapping, it should be what? What's chapter 10 in the mapping?
7.
7. Okay, so the questions from chapter 7, it should be only 20, so I'll give us 30 minutes this time so that you have some time to work on them, as well as a little time for yourself, give yourself a break. Yeah, so that's what we'll do. We'll do 30 minute sprint. I'll split you up into breakout rooms. You'll work with your partner on those 20 questions, have a little 10-minute break. We'll come back together and talk about the next assignment. So go ahead and take 5 minutes, use the restroom, whatever you need to do.